Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos Ribbits, which, as I'm sure you know, is an anagram of births, obits, pretty much the start and end of everything. And today that's entirely appropriate because we're going to be looking back at, well, Gilbert and Sullivan's perhaps least successful collaboration together. But why? Why would you do that? Why would you look at their least successful? Well, actually, I think it's fair to say that in the 140 odd years since Gilbert and Sullivan started working together, the dust has finally settled. The view of the Victorians has changed. The view of the first two-thirds of the 20th century has changed. We're now over 100 years since both collaborators died. So we at last have a clear view of what they gave the world and the quality relative to each other of the shows that they wrote. Now, there's no denying Gilbert and Sullivan are popular, and there's no denying that they're successful. Their shows are still being produced today in 2 centuries after the time when they generally lived. That in itself is impressive, but we cannot say that all the shows are masterpieces. For many years, the last two, Utopia Limited and The Grand Duke, were not even mentioned. They were very much a coda, an extra at the end, considered to be massive, massive failures, and not even recorded until the 1970s by the D'Oyly Carte Opera Company. Well, of course, people have been fascinated by those shows, and they've come back to life and have now taken their rightful place in the canon. But was the general view that these two shows were not nearly as good as the rest the correct one? Well, your view is as good as mine on that, and you probably know what my view is. My view on the whole is that The Grand Duke actually has a very great deal to commend it. Utopia Limited, perhaps less so. And recently I was lucky enough to go and see a production of Utopia Limited, but I think it showed to me that my general view is correct. It's a good show, but it's by far from being the best Gilbert and Sullivan. And in fact, relative to the others, is it one of the least good? Well, let's find out in this discussion today, when we investigate the weaknesses and the strengths, and let's not forget there are many strengths, of Gilbert and Sullivan's penultimate creation, Utopia Limited. And in this conversation, I was joined by noted historian of the world of Gilbert and Sullivan and director of many of their shows, not originally, you understand, more recently, Jerry Purnell, an old friend of this programme. Musical Talk. Jerry, a pleasure as always to see you again.
Thank you.
And to hear you again. And I think hearing's really what we're all about today.
It helps.
And today we're going to be talking about Utopia Limited.
Mm-hmm.
Now, briefly, Utopia Limited is one of the last two Gilbert and Sullivan operetta, the comic operas. For many years absolutely ignored because they weren't in the repertoire of the D'Oyly Carte, consigned to history as sort of runt-end cast-offs, not good enough. But G&S continues to be popular, and these two have been rediscovered really in the 70s, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And while still not very common, can always be found. You've already directed The Grand Duke.
Mm-hmm.
Last year you directed Utopia Limited. You and I like The Grand Duke. What do you think about Utopia Limited?
Utopia Limited is a very mixed bag, really. It has a lot of very good things. It doesn't build... It doesn't really have a... It doesn't hang together brilliantly as a show. The elements... some are very successful, some are less successful and can be worked on. I think compared with The Grand Duke, which is basically a very solid show,
yes,
for which too much material was written, but for which certainly enough notes of what Gilbert originally planned exist, and sometimes rehearsal bits of dialogue and so on, even cut songs exist, that you can make a good stab at reconstructing what was nearly performed. But some bad decisions were made, and Gilbert losing confidence in himself. Whereas with Utopia, I think there was a sense that they didn't, Gilbert and Sullivan, having had their big quarrel over carpets and expenses and so on and so forth, which had caused a rift in their professional partnership.
This is their reunion show.
It's their reunion show after 4 years, and I think a combination of lack of certainty about themselves. They both had moderately successful collaborations with other librettists and composers
in that 4-year period.
In that 4-year period, but nothing special indeed. And I think a lack of trust in each other fundamentally meant that one thing was that they weren't really as critical of each other, of each other's input, as they had been in the past. I think they'd had a very healthy relationship in terms of
quite
honest.
bizarrely.
Yes, but they were very honest about each other's contributions. So with Utopia Limited, they were really keen not to upset each other. I think, therefore, the quality got compromised. Sullivan would say, "Oh, I don't like this character. She doesn't give me enough opportunities as a composer to write sympathetic music," and Gilbert, rather than saying, no, that character has to be like that because that's what the whole point of the play is, would say, "Okay, I'll go and change it." And similarly, Sullivan, I think, didn't, he made fuss about that because I think it was an area that he just got on his high horse about, but he let some other things go where normally he might have reined Gilbert in a bit.
Yes, the give and take, the balance between the two was sort of wrong in a strange way, and in both directions, if that makes any sense. Yeah, but the thing you mentioned about the character is true, isn't it? Because it has a traditional elderly lady, which is one of Gilbert's stock characters, who's the Lady Sophie character, the one that King Paramount loves and is loved by.
Yes, indeed.
But she is played and she's written now, mostly straight, which I believe was not Gilbert's intention. She wanted to be a bit more grotesque.
Well, she
was therefore funny.
Not necessarily grotesque, but certainly to have a passionate she would have a bit more of a backstory, basically.
A fuller character.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, that's it, really. That she comes across basically as quite bland. She's one of the dullest alto roles in GNS, and obviously Gilbert is well known, or allegedly, for being anti-older women in his depiction of them. But I think often they're very honest depictions and quite sympathetic in their way about what a rotten lot, what a lot in life women of a certain age had, certainly in that. And
also,
time.
As a writer, he was giving his actresses much more significant roles by writing better parts for them, frankly, than Lady Sophie unfortunately ever really gets to be.
Yes. I think the other thing about Utopia which makes it disappointing, almost certainly the lack of give and take doesn't help, but it's that possibly Gilbert, I think accurately actually, calculated that anything they did would be a draw. And so he hasn't constructed the play as a sort of coherent narrative. Lots of things tail off, and I don't know whether he consciously thought that'll do, or whether he just wasn't really up to the job anymore. In a way that I think a couple of years later he definitely pulled himself together for the Grand Duke. I think he definitely knew what he wanted to say in the Grand Duke. In Utopia Limited, he had a lot of prejudices which he wanted to really, or not say prejudices, but he had a lot of things that he wanted to have a rant about.
Yes.
Basically about Britishness. He was fed up with it all. And
which is what the play is
absolutely
about.
Yes.
When I was younger, when I was first into Gilbert and Sullivan and researching it and reading the Bailey book and all this kind of stuff, I remember reading the reviews of Utopia and the descriptions of it before I really knew it at all, even from the score. And the argument always was that whereas he had picked an issue to have a pop at in previous shows, he had a pop at really far too much. Pretty much all stones are turned in British culture and the body politic, if you like.
Yes.
And as such, it has to be a slightly blunter instrument, which I think is actually fair.
Yes, and I think the key problem is that what the play is at least partly about, or primarily about, is systems of government and systems of running the economy. So pretty big issues. And he obviously wants to point out how some aspects of the British political and economic system stink, in his view, and I think often he has a point. But in terms of a narrative, you start off with an apparently idyllic South Sea island.
Called Utopia. Yeah, clues there, isn't it?
Yes. You twigged. And then he has to sort of introduce, for the sake of having any kind of dramatic tension, he has to introduce there being sort of trouble in paradise. So they have a political system that doesn't work. As a result of this, the king's daughter, Princess Zara, who has been studying in England for some years, returns with 6 examples of
what makes Britain great.
What makes Britain great. And occasionally what makes England great, because the two terms are interchangeable. And so they bring in these various reforms, which are described in the second act, and some of them are for the good, and some of them sound rather peculiar. So that's sort of being funny about the fact that, you know, the introducing British characteristics into society doesn't always work out for the best. And so that's quite funny. But then at the end, you have to have a sort of big payoff, and his big payoff is that the British parliamentary system is a complete mess and leads to everything, you know, leads to massive inefficiencies and unfairness in society, etc., etc. So in order for that to happen, you have to have at the end all the reforms instituted by the 6 British guests, the Flowers of Progress as they're called. They have to have created a perfect society in order for when they introduce the final reform, namely to introduce the party political system, that we don't see it, but it is explained that this will create prosperity because it will lead to massive bipartisan arguing over every issue.
Everything that is done shall be undone immediately afterwards.
Exactly.
When the party changes, stand back again.
Exactly. Yes. So
prosperity for all.
Prosperity for all. That's the thing. It's argued that this idyllic world that's been created or idyllic society by importing the Flowers of Progress, all the British customs,
is unsustainable.
It's suggested it's too perfect, and that the thing is that because there's fantastic sanitation now, all the doctors are starving.
As are the lawyers.
All the lawyers, because crimes have been wiped out because there's such an efficient legal system and good. And
their army and their navy has been remodelled so perfectly that
they've got nobody to fight.
That's right. Their neighbours have disarmed, and therefore no war is possible.
Exactly.
Which is identified as being a failure.
Which is exactly, that's the thing. Really. So, in other words, you have sort of 3. You have the initial system, which is untouched by British hand, which for dramatic reasons has to be pointed out as not perfect. Then you have the reforms, and so for satirical purposes, Gilbert points out that yes, some of them are undesirable and a bit peculiar, but nevertheless they have to lead to perfection in order for the final reform
to undo that perfection.
To undo that perfection by introducing parliamentary politics or party politics, which Gilbert saw as obviously the ultimate evil. You know, to get that gag at the end, you have to have depicted society as having become perfect. So he's rather inconsistent about whether what starts off and what you sort of think you're going to get from a description of it, and no doubt what Victorian audiences thought they were going to get when details leaked out, because they were masters of teasing the public, putting out little spoilers and that sort of thing. I think people expected, and will expect to this day, from a sort of basic description of the idea of the opera, is that it's going to show how importing Britishness actually causes everything to go to pot. But for the reasons I've just outlined, with wanting to get various key punchlines at key points, not all of them are disastrous, some of them are good, and of course Utopia isn't idyllic in the first place.
Yes.
So it all becomes rather muddled, and it's difficult to sort of pull out a really cohesive theme from it. If you do regard it as just Gilbert having a rant about everything left, right and centre, it sort of works, and you can get away with it because there's some very jolly music in it, and there's some pretty cutting dialogue. But it doesn't become more than the sum of its parts.
No, very much less, I think.
Well, thank you, haven't seen my production.
No, but some of its parts are excellent. But just to counter that a bit, I think you could argue it the other way around, though, that he's arguing that actually there is a difference between attaining perfection or aiming perfection and aiming for an anglicisation, because they constantly talk about the anglicisation of Utopia. And it's shown, as you say, you reach this mock new Utopia where everything's going well, but so well that it isn't going well. So I think the point that's really being made is, or the way I always read it, is the fact that actually slavish devotion to British principles will not bring you perfection. So you've got to reform your British principles. So I actually think it's all about, it's all back to things aren't quite right here in Britain.
Yes.
However,
which British principles are you talking about as being not perfect? Do you mean the party political stuff or some of the other?
No, I'm just talking about in general. British society
well,
could be made better, and he's shown you how to do it, as you say, by the removal.
Well, and this has caused some commentators to become rather
agitated
because what they say is, well, if it's that introducing all this Britishness under and basically this all arises through running Utopia as a company.
Yes.
With the king as CEO. Don't think they use that term, but
he's the chair of the board.
He is the chair of the board, and so some people have rather nervously said, "Ooh, does this mean Gilbert's actually in favour of absolute monarchy, and therefore that he doesn't believe in democracy?" I think that's reading too much into it simply because
and ignores the final line.
Well, yes, but I mean, I think it is that of course, and there are other examples of Gilbert not being terribly keen on monarchy at all,
yes.
Or at least the British monarchy. So I think the thing is, insofar as there's any theme throughout Gilbert's work, it's that common sense is best. If people only adhered to common sense, then the world would be a better place. That generally applies in lovemaking as well. In that if there was if you had a common sense attitude to romance, then everything would be much better, and you wouldn't get all these romantic complications and people mooning over lost loves and all that sort of nonsense.
However, let me bring you down to the thing that really, really struck me when I saw your production last year. Last year was 2012. Now, we know the headline banner things for 2012 were the Diamond Jubilee of Her Majesty the Queen and the Olympics here in Britain. However, there was lots of lovely other stuff going on. There was the Leveson inquiry into the press. There was the revelation of tax avoidance by, in many cases, individuals who had declared themselves to be companies and were therefore paying corporation tax rather than individual tax, and were signed off on various islands. And even just observations, things like the theatres being full of old plays rather than new plays. Oh, and newspapers which were scandal magazines closing down, which of course were News of the World.
Yes.
These things all occurred in 2012. What seemed absolutely astounding to me was that these things occur in Utopia Limited, in Gilbert's original book from 1893. 120 years ago, Gilbert was talking about these very, very issues. In fact, 2012 was possibly the most resonant year of all after that. How did you know that when you adopted?
Yes. I popped in my time machine and spotted it. The Centenary Company who produced this, we tend to decide the show sometime, basically no more than a year in advance, often a bit less than that. Basically, by the November production, 1 year, we sometimes know, or else we'll work out very quickly afterwards what the following years will be. So in 2011, we knew about I think the closure of the News of the World was actually in 2011, so Leveson was on its way. I can't remember whether he'd actually started. It went on for so long, I forget now when it actually got underway.
With the press, I think it was building
discontent,
point,
definitely. All the tax stuff has been going. I mean, really, it was building up nicely, and in effect, we were very lucky that it just continued unabated, and if anything, grew in 2012. I think it did suddenly feel it was like it was the right time.
Yes.
In particular, the Centenary Company is a GNS company. Never does anything else, and so it's been around for getting on for 20 years. So they've done most of the shows, some of them twice, but not quite all. And so it was nice to be able to say to them, look, there's a show here that most of you don't know, but if you're a GNS company and want to do the canon, this is the one to do now. Personally speaking, I, about 10 years ago, sort of started thinking about how to produce Utopia Limited, about the changes you'd have to make how you could make it a bit more of a workable, successful show than what was left to us. But in 1893,
had to stage it for a modern audience.
Yes, basically. And I thought then that the big hook that made it relevant was the cultural imperialism side of things. We what with Iraq and Afghanistan, that was where the resonance was. But at the time, I could find no group interested in staging it. But fortunately for me, the Western economy collapsed about 5 years later, and
so it's all been worth it.
It's all been worth it in the end, because in a way, I mean, there's also sort of references to all the company stuff. Sort of has been really relevant ever since. So as you say, the media thing really kicked off a couple of years ago. The disgruntlement with the mass media and their intrusive ways. Incidentally, speaking of intrusive mass media, or the way they're depicted, Private Eye, the current issue...
At the time of recording?
At the time of recording, in late May 2013, the current issue has a feature about brass plate companies in Britain, basically, these fronts for rather shady activities worldwide. And they have a couple of Utopia references, and there is even a box out that says, who are the modern Mr. Goldberries, which is the name of the company speculator in Utopia Limited, who causes the entire country to be privatised, and then goes further by, as you sort of made reference to earlier, the idea that every individual becomes a company, and therefore, if they, the particular benefit of that, it is felt, is that if any of them lose all their money, they just declare themselves bankrupt.
More than that,
with
they stop paying for their bills.
They stop paying their bills, so they have a limited liability of
they go shopping and then wind themselves up,
yes,
so they don't have to pay.
Exactly.
Which I thought was very funny.
Because I think spiralling personal debt is another. It's not really brought out in the show very much, but given where we are, it again seems very redolent.
So you've got all these absolutely hot button issues at the moment going on at the moment, and then you've got this 120-year-old text, which bizarrely seems to pick most of them up. That's a gift, it seems. So what did you have to do to the script?
In terms of the topical references, very little. We beefed up one or two just slightly. The main issue was really taking this almost review-style show, where there are individual scenes that work very well, but they don't really hang together, and trying to make them hang together a bit more. So it was more of a structural issue, really, than...
to bring coherence,
yes,
to make the set pieces work
yes,
in a sequence.
I was sort of keen to point out in programme notes and so on, that this was pretty much all Gilbert in terms of the barbs, and we occasionally sort of... we occasionally built them up a tiny bit just to sort of slightly more modern language, but they're all there.
You can refocus them in them.
Yes, but they are all there. So what did I do? Well, it was mainly going back to what we were talking about earlier, and sort of what makes Utopia perhaps a less successful show, a less coherent show than the Grand Duke. Some of it is just Gilbert, I think, being very lackadaisical. He'll have two characters say, let's go and have a chat together, and then they go and do things with other people, and then they come back and say, now at last we can have our chat together. It's like, well, you went off to have a chat together 10 minutes ago, and so what's happened there? So there's that. A key thing in the original was a scene in Act 2, which was a ballroom. Well, not quite a ballroom scene. It was a drawing room. It was the royal drawing room where all of the utopians are presented at court. I mentioned earlier sort of that Gilbert Sullivan liked putting out teasers, and so it was known that this was going to be happening, and the press of the day thought this was going to be fantastic fun, and there'd be much scope for satire on the way things are done at an English drawing room. And in the end, they did it absolutely straight, which is probably because, as I said, Gilbert wasn't quite sure what the public wanted after 4 years without a big hit, as far as he was concerned. And so going for spectacle. And so apparently, and this has been pointed out as sort of being a slight irony, that given that the argument they'd had focused on the expenses for the previous show, which Gilbert thought had been allowed to sort of run out of control a bit. Thanks to him insisting on this incredibly lavish scene, Utopia cost about
£7,200.
Yes, which is about 1.5 times what the budget for the previous show, The Gondoliers, had been, which he'd thought was excessive.
And with some things that you just wouldn't necessarily think would be useful. For example, I understand in that scene alone, it was there was an insistence by Gilbert that the floor be genuine parquet.
Well, I think he liked to do things properly.
He did, but does any audience member ever go home criticising the floor?
Well, they may have been whistling it. They whistled the parquet. A good point, I think. I think this may demonstrate how sort of askew their priorities were and their thinking was at that point. They weren't really quite sure what it was going to take for it to be a successful show, so they threw everything, the whole kitchen sink at it. So going back to what I to sort of changes made, we kept that scene in. And I'll have to be honest, one reason why we kept it in is because it involves a chorus, and because, whereas I was talking earlier about the Grand Duke having sort of an excess of material, and you can sort of prune the less successful stuff and keep in the successful things, even if they were things that got, the wrong things got cut sometimes prior to or even slightly after performance, the first performance. Whereas with Utopia, it's actually a bit thin, and if you whittle away at too much stuff, you don't have a very long show. So it sort of had to be kept in, but partly because we couldn't, of course, do that magnificent a spectacle, but also because, to be honest, the press of the time were quite bemused by it. They said, "Oh, it's lovely, but what is this doing in a professedly comic opera?" So we sort of
revved up the comedy
and in effect gave the newspapers of 1893 what they'd been hoping for, but just a century and a bit late.
I must just make the reference, though. You've hit on something which is still true today, though. Once again, another resonance, although this one inadvertent rather than deliberate, which is when you don't know what your audience wants, you do throw in a spectacle. That's a modern trope. A number of shows in London where they, people advertise and bang on about the special effects, but no one ever says, by the way, the score's a load of old pants.
Yes.
Which, there's many a musical in London at the moment where the songs are rubbish, but a ghost will walk through a mirror, for example.
Right.
No names, no pack drill. One of the things that you quite often do, Jerry, is that you quite often discover lost songs and try and reintroduce them. Now, bearing in mind you were trimming and cutting a bit in this one, because Act 1 runs to an hour and a half originally.
It does, yeah.
It takes a long time. It does an awful lot of setting up an environment, which the end of Act 1's denouement is, look, here are the British people coming over to change it. So all you've done is set up the world, which is then to be changed. So it's a long Act 1.
Yes.
What did you do with the score?
Score-wise, the main change was, as you say, discovering an old lyric. There's not a lot in Utopia that sort of lost pickings to chew over, because basically Gilbert went on this rather peculiar track quite early on, and there wasn't that much to discuss. Yes. But one song that he did discard quite early on sort of explained the origins of the Utopians' Anglomania, which then got cut, which means that there's sort of no explanation of that, which is a bit peculiar. Just sort of structurally, most GNSs, or an awful lot of them, open with a chorus. Well, they all open with a chorus, with one exception, which may be a jolly chorus, like "Pour, oh, pour the pirate sherry," or maybe a more languid one, setting the scene, such as 20 lovesick maidens who are drooping around at the beginning of Patience, or at the beginning of Utopia, in lazy languor motionless.
Yes.
Which, when you've got motionless as the fourth word of the song, it's very difficult to get things off to a rollicking start for a director.
It up a bit. Yes.
Right. So what often they lobbed in is a song by a minor character immediately after, or perhaps a bit of dialogue in between, but basically immediately after this opening chorus.
The context song.
The context song. And that's what's lacking in Utopia Limited, whereas this song that explains our Anglomania, and basically the reason is that a British ship came along one day and rowed ashore a gentleman who basically sneered at them and
told
acted...
them they were barbarians.
Yes, it acted extremely... It told them that he was superior to them, and they bought it, and said... if you want to improve yourself, then be like us, and hence what I said earlier.
Which is suitably Gilbertian.
Yes, absolutely.
They really want to be British because a British person
has told them that they should be
so badly towards them.
Yes, that's quite right.
It's perfect.
And there was no other reason than that. He basically, by sneering,
Yes.
They thought he must be
onto something.
He must be superior because he is acting superior. But that probably is actually how a lot of colonialism did work.
Yes.
Usually a few more guns involved as well, but I think often it was impressing. I mean, there's a reason why army uniforms used to be so decorative and splendid.
This day, the speech mark's nice reason for empire. I mean, the old reason for empire is we just want to expand, get more territory. But the defenders of it are always, and culturally this is quite awkward to explain away, but it's to speech marks bring civilization.
Yes,
and that still sticks in the craw rather when you're looking at the world in a slightly more liberal way.
Yes, and in that respect, I think Gilbert is relatively unusual in the 1890s to be critiquing the idea of empire, and the reasons behind it. Given that there aren't any guns in Utopia, so it is all about cultural superiority and cultural civilizing. That's the word. Anyway, so yes, we took basically there are very few examples in GNS, in my opinion. Others may differ in their opinion, where you have a bad lyric set to uninspiring music. I don't pretend that all GNS is fantastic in both words and music, but almost always
one of the pistons is working.
Exactly. If Gilbert was having a bit of a bad day, then Sullivan will
step up to the plate.
Not least because, of course, it would give him the opportunity. Given that he was always complaining that some of Gilbert's brilliant lyrics sort of meant that he didn't have all he could do. He was holding himself back because it would be unfair to the lyrics to set them to anything fancy. He had to just let them speak. If there was anything a bit more mundane, it gave him the opportunity to go with it, and probably Gilbert thought, "Oh, good,
someone can do this."
Yes, exactly. But there's one example of the introductory song for the King, which isn't really necessary.
King of Autocratic Power We.
King of Autocratic Power We, which is a plodding song.
A dirgy song.
Yes, and doesn't really say very much. It's just the King telling you about himself, which other people have already told you, that he's a despot, but he's a nice chap, really. And so, with very little tweaking, fortunately, the lyrics of the Lost Song about the Anglomania could be fitted to that tune. So we had one song to a tune of another, and so that slotted in very nicely to
and
that.
Rather better.
I hope so. Yes.
Can I ask a couple of things on songs? The first is you reminded me of the introductory song to. Which is Make Way for the Wise Men, which is also around that period, quite early on in Act 1, which is a marvellous piece of Sullivan, funny enough, because it's got this really bizarre galumphing beat rhythm to it. It is galumphing. It's very odd. It's supposed to be regal, but it's curious.
Well, it's weird. It's one of the weirdest numbers in the show because Sullivan, his score, we haven't talked about at all. I've been focusing on Gilbert exclusively, which is
really our bag.
Which is our bag, but I shall attempt to put my musicianly hat on, which is difficult because it doesn't fit very well, and say that there's some fantastic music in Utopia, and and I should add that given that we've been basically bad mouthing the show for half an hour or whatever, it is
not a bad show.
It is not a bad show at all.
But by the way, it was George Bernard Shaw's favourite Gilbert and Sullivan collaboration.
Yes, that's a peculiar attitude to have, but. Anyway,
it rang somebody's bells.
I think he thought it was a bit pro-socialist, so he was all for it.
Certainly a bit anti-establishment.
Well, quite yes. I wouldn't be interested in doing it if it was purely to complete the set. I'd be a bit interested in doing it to complete the set because I'm a nerd and I like
a collection.
I like a collection.
But it's not worthless.
It's not worthless at all, and there's some splendid stuff. Especially, it has to be said, when the First Life Guards enter. They have a stupendous tune. A lot of the stuff in the Act 1 finale is marvellous. There's some. There's a great trio in Act 2. Anyway, the score is definitely worth listening to. But where he's least successful is really creating a mood for the Utopians. And it's interesting that you like the galumphing. It is interesting and galumphing. But it's very different from the opening number about lazy languor, and then there's a bit more languorousness, or just languor, later on when the King first enters and all of the Utopian ladies do a rather very Polynesian kind of swaying from side to side about quaffing the nectar and etc. etc.
Enjoying the poppy.
Yes. So this Make Way for the Wise Men does stand out a bit like a sore thumb, and in fact I don't disagree with you, but others do, and others say that's a prime example of a very lackluster lackluster tune rather from Sullivan.
Really?
Yes, and feeling that he doesn't create, and it is probably true that in something like the Mikado, there are enough homages, just enough to Japanese or certainly sort of Oriental music to give it a slight feeling of exoticness, and certainly in the Gondoliers, there's it's lovely lilting and very Venetian. You really sort of transported there. I have to say that I don't feel particularly transported to a Polynesian isle by Sullivan. The languid numbers are great, and they're a fantastic contrast to the pomp when the British characters turn up. But it's interesting that you choose that one just because others don't. I have a sort of I don't have that strong opinion on it. It does feel a bit peculiar though.
Well, the way I justify it in my head is that, and this comes from a position of absolute cultural ignorance from me, but it's generically Polynesian, this utopian island before change. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me there are two ways of thinking of Polynesian culture, which is, I'm doing it a massive disservice, so please don't write in and say, you fool. I know I'm a fool. But you've got the languid ladies wafting, for want of a better phrase, lying there doing very little, being faintly soporific, really. I mean, it's almost too languid. And I think that's one thing I would level at Sullivan. Actually, I think the whole plot the whole score is a little languid, even when occasionally it needs a bit more power and a bit more edge.
Yes, and I think that Act 1 is that. Yeah. We've discussed how Act 1 takes its time to get going, and I think that if there was a bit more oomph to the music, that might help. But then Gilbert dictated that stuff.
But I don't. Yes, you're right. It's in the lyrics, but I'm not at all taken by Sullivan's language stuff, because it's just like listening to lapping water. It's all very well for a couple of minutes, but really, I don't want a show of it. Whereas the Galumphing song, I think, fits in with a slightly different attitude to Polynesian culture, which is, this is a horrible thing to say, but it's the pot-bellied nature of the culture. I don't necessarily mean the people, although historically there is an element of a bigger build, perhaps, in some senses. But there is a kind of I'm going to use the word pot-bellied in terms of culture to it, and I think that song galumps and goes along with that. You just don't get it uniformly through the piece.
Yes. Well, actually, I had sort of the guards to the Wise Men sort of coming on doing what it was meant to be, something quite sort of vaguely hacker-like, to give that
which
sort
is a
of
dance,
it's well known if you're a rugby aficionado to sort of to accompany it, and I agree. I think that's probably the style he was going for. I would just say it doesn't. It feels a bit alien, because it is funny, a funny rhythm. It's got a funny rhythm, and whether that says Polynesian to me, it says sort of different. I think it could be a bit more successful, but I hope this encourages people to listen to the score and form their own views. Yes, exactly. Yeah,
there are two very good recordings out there. There's the Doily Cart, which is a Royston Nash conducting from 1975, I think. And then there's an early 90s version, which is the Ohio Light Opera.
Yes, yeah.
And they put the dialogue in. So
yes, I'd go for the Doily Cart one, I think.
For the precision.
I think for the precision, I think they're a bit less wayward with tempi sometimes. Yeah.
I should say the Ohio one are not, with no disrespect to them, they're more of an amateur, but they're not professional.
Yes.
But there are two recordings out there. But let's talk about some of the songs, because we were saying earlier that overall Utopia Limited doesn't quite hit the heights of some of the others. It's perfectly good, but it's not brilliant. And that's what we expect from Gilbert and Sullivan. We expect a certain amount of brilliance. And on this occasion that's missing. Mm-hmm. There are some songs in it, however, which add to that sense of set piece and episode. I.e., so much of it is good. So many bite-sized chunks. And I just want to name a few songs immediately off the top of my head. I love the Although of Native Maids the Queen, which is the two which is for daughters who have come back from Britain and are now fully trained in British ways of demure behaviour and how to be modest and charming. The lyrics really undercut this, so they're on display in the marketplace, giving lectures about how modest they are.
Yes,
and indeed, they go on to say, you need to be modest if you want to be like the perfect British, and we are that and more.
Indeed, yes.
So it's an old joke, but it works really well.
Yes.
I think that song works brilliantly. And it was also got the lovely line about people standing around writing down what they're doing in their pocket memorandum books, and using their Kodak cameras.
The Kodaks do their best, yes,
which is
very up, absolutely.
You press the button and the rest will leave to us.
Yeah.
Which I believe is one of the advertising slogans for Kodak.
I think you may be right, actually. Yes.
So a bit of commercialism popping in there.
Quite, yes.
So that's
and that's funny because they say you only need a button press and we do all the rest. So in other words, it's twisting the slogan to be about how the princesses do it all.
But it is full of lovely jokes, that one as well. There's a lovely one where they slightly resent what they have to do these continual lectures because it cuts into their lunch.
Yes.
It's very sort of irritated. They are paraded as perfection, and yet they very clearly show themselves not to be the perfection.
Yes, it's a sort of tough one to pull off actually in performance. I think because they have to maintain that. I think they are genuinely very prim, but they're very self-aware as well, which is again another. That's quite a typical Gilbert woman. We talked about Gilbert giving women strong parts. I think there's such a level of self-awareness.
Yeah.
In a lot of GNS heroines, and I think
which makes it very
it's good to see. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I think yes, they're very good.
I love the arrival of the two wise men. Now, the two wise men. We mentioned briefly the speech marks unsustainable current political circumstances in Utopia at the very beginning, where they have an autocratic ruler, even though he's very nice. But he's not his own master, because actually we've got these two people who basically sit on his shoulder all the time and insist that he does precisely what they tell him. So they are the autocratic rulers of him.
They are meant to be the checks and balances, and presumably there are meant to be two of them, so that
they check each other.
They check each other as well. But the problem is when they are both unscrupulous speculators and are in cahoots, then
he does what he's
it
told,
goes on. Yes. And in that respect, just going sort of slightly off topic. In some ways, I wasn't sure whether we might be going a bit too getting too deeply into what Gilbert, how elusive he was being. But in some respects, that's another sort of facet of British government. That you got the parliamentary side or the party politics side at the end, which gets revealed as far as Gilbert's concerned, the sort of a great source of stupidity and
it's the solution and the problem.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But the idea of it's probably at least as modern now as at least as topical now as it was then, of ministers or prime ministers or whatever, and having should we say outside influences. Lobbyists, basically,
which are currently very much. The lobbyist register keeps coming back onto the agenda here in Britain in 2013 again. So once again, he's on the button with that.
Yes, yeah.
But I love these two characters because they basically go around being corrupt and cross for most of the play, and are actually the comedy, much of the source of the comedy.
Yes, very much so.
And one's called Tarara.
No. It's Scapio and Fantis, and Tarara is Tarara is a public exploder.
That's right.
Who is pressed into service if the two wise men
demand it.
Yes.
He executes the king. The public
yes,
exploder.
Indeed, and then reigns in his stead.
Yes,
as recompense for his wounded feelings.
Sorry, you just reminded me that Tarara, obviously named after the song Tarara Boom.
Indeed.
And that song had only been written 2 years beforehand.
Yes,
1891, I think. But I love the song where the two wise men come on, and they once again, they're not at all modest,
Yes.
We claim to rank before the wisest of humanity. I like that. There's a lovely song at the beginning of Act 2, which serves very little purpose, but is great fun, which is a tenor can't do justice.
Yes. Well, that's a prime example of the bitty, the sort of review-like nature of a lot of the second act.
And self-awareness as
well.
Yes,
it's self-awareness, but the romantic hero, for no reason at all, just has a song in which he and it's the Act 2 opener, so it is quite a sort of it's both it's a good musical number, and also it pokes fun at tenors when he says that because of his ardour as a tenor, he is unable to sing properly. And the sort of the crowning glory of it for people who like to pick up on examples of Gilbert being nasty is that immediately after he has sung this and said how repeatedly it's no good, I can't do myself justice, his beloved says to him, my dear Arthur, what does it matter? And this is the only character called Arthur in the entire GNS canon, and this is coming after Gilbert has been having festering feelings of resentment towards Arthur Sullivan for 4 years, and it's the only example of an Arthur, and he happens to be a musician who can't do himself justice.
Well, while we're on that subject, then let's take a little byline into those little moments of Gilbertian spite, which are peppered throughout, because as you say, they were desperate, Gilbert and Sullivan were desperate to stay in with each other in their good books during the creation of it, but that doesn't stop Gilbert, because he can't stop himself, popping a couple of bits and pieces in. I learnt recently that for whatever reason in the plot, the king is forced to pretend to be an English musical star and appear in a fake comic opera denouncing the king every evening. So he essentially has to pretend to be an actor who denounces himself in public, his way of humiliating him.
That's because the two wise men own the theatre, so they make money out of him ridiculing himself because it packs in the crowds.
And that's interesting, isn't it? Because there are two elements here. First of all, the character that the king is forced to play as the musical comedian is called Wilkinson, who I believe was the name of the lawyer who persuaded Sullivan to write the affidavit.
Something like that, yes. He was certainly,
And also, I believe whereas previously, up to that point, there had been a kind of profit share arrangement between the three, Gilbert, Sullivan and D'Oyly Carte, but because of his dissatisfaction on this one, he'd arranged a set fee. So
I think a set royalty share, I think, rather than...
Which made him feel like a paid hack when the two owners of the theatre, if you like, Sullivan and D'Oyly Carte, or Saphis and...
Scaffio and Fantis,
thank you. You can see the parallels there. There is a joke about an affidavit in the piece. There
is when the two wise men and Tarara are plotting in Act 2. The whole point is that Tarara's gone away to whip the populace into a fervour of anti-British sentiment.
Yes.
And he meets up with the two wise men again, and they say, well, have you explained everything about how what they thought was happiness is in fact misery?
Yes.
And he says, I've done better than that. I swore an affidavit.
Yes.
And you can't help but believe an affidavit.
So yes.
I think that you imagine that on the first night with Sullivan
in the box,
conducting. Yes, he must have enjoyed that a lot.
And also there's a rather splendid comment actually about a carpet.
Yes, well,
in one of the songs.
It's just that there's during the initial plotting by the two wise men and Tarara, they can't initially work out how they're going to bring the king to his knees and get rid of all these British characters. So having failed to plot, they come down and address the audience directly and say, alas, we haven't quite solved the plot. They're not a very ingenious lot, but don't be unhappy, it's still on the tappy. We'll slyly develop this capital plot. And on the tappy was a common expression at the time, rather less common now, as far as I'm aware, meaning on the cards, likely. But tapis, of course, is literally French for carpet.
Yes.
Why on the carpet is an expression meaning likely, I don't know. But again, you sort of, maybe it's coincidence, but
quite a lot of coincidences.
There's a lot of coincidences in this. And of course, the ultimate
insult.
Well, a key sort of point of the show is this thing about British company law, which allows directors to set up companies with a very limited liability and then walk away scot-free. Well, if it all goes horribly wrong. And it's been suggested, I think, probably not inaccurately, that the fact that D'Oyly Carte had built the Royal English Opera House for largely for Sullivan to put on, to
Now
stage his
Theatre.
Grand Opera, now the Palace Theatre, and it's now the Palace Theatre because although Sullivan's Grand Opera, which it was built for, was Ivanhoe, was a pretty big success by those standards. Basically, D'Oyly Carte miscalculated. He didn't set up a rep system.
Yeah.
He didn't have anything else
There was no
lined up.
Great
There was
British
no
Opera.
second Great British Opera, and so he sold it off. And a consortium was formed to buy it, and to raise the money to buy it, they issued a prospectus and described what a marvellous theatre it was going to be. And so this was happening in the build-up to the show. So I think Gilbert must have been feeling that, you know, this is a bit iffy, that
Yes.
you embark on some grand speculation, it all goes wrong, and so you walk away by ultimately getting
Your
the public
shareholders to take the blame.
yeah, exactly, yes, or certainly the risk.
Musical talk. Funny enough, we having finished our digression about Gilbert's spite, which is always worth a little bit of a tour around, because there's always so much of it. And I love Gilbert, but you know, he can't hide himself.
No,
he can't. Is that song you were just talking about, where actually the Two Wise Men and Tarara, the public exploder, it's a two-verse song, essentially. The first verse, they're trying to develop this plot, as you say, and can't.
Mm-hmm.
And then after the chorus at the end, they come back, and in the second verse, they do. But what I really like about it is, it must be a very early example of the people getting together in a huddle and going instead of telling you what they're saying, which is a cartoon staple now. You see that a lot in comedies and cartoons and things like that.
Yes.
But I have never seen an earlier example of them. And so I don't know if Gilbert invented it or whether he's using a trope from the time, which may have been on the music halls for all I know. But it's still in place. But I can think of no earlier example of that. And actually, the song is very joyous. I quite like the fact that
it's very well set by Sullivan as well in terms of it's a beautiful. I don't know whether tune is the right word, but you know the music to accompany their and then the the interjections where certainly in the first verse it's sort of
they poo-poo each other.
Yeah, exactly. So first of all there's let's do this, and then the other two poo-poo it, and then the second verse the other two tend to agree with it. But the way it's structured is very clever. It's quite a tricky sing. We had three talented singers in terms of a good sense of musicality, and they found it a real challenge to get on top of.
Setting it must have been very interesting for Sullivan as well, because it's got those moments in it, you've got gaps in the lyrics. So there's if you like half a song deliberately written that way. This isn't Gilbert not writing a song properly. He's writing a song, but it's so unconventional and curious and doesn't do what you'd expect a song to do.
Yes.
So then Sullivan has to come along and do something splendid with it. And I think they both rise to each other.
I was about to say, having said that, sometimes in GNS you get one firing on all cylinders to make up for the other. I think this is one where it has a great lyric, but because it's a great lyric where, as you say, half of it is missing, in effect, Sullivan can't just write a sort of tum-ti-tum tune to accompany the lyric. He has to find something special,
and he does.
Yes, yeah. It's I think the not least for its momentum. It's got great momentum, and it does have a sense. It conveys brilliantly the plotting.
Yeah.
With let's do this, blah 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 blah. Oh no, and to sort of to create that feeling of urgency that they have. They're desperate to work out how to bring the king down, and put it in a musical context, but really preserve that sense of
the comic conceit.
The comic conceit
and the dramatic conceit.
The dramatic conceit, and the sense that it is sort of happening in real time, and they are genuine. So often, in any musical theatre, you do run the risk that once people start singing rather than having that's why you have dialogue. Sometimes the dialogue is where you do stuff, and the songs are where you sing about it. And songs when things are actually done, especially at any pace, always risk becoming a bit sort of unreal, and you don't really feel they are doing it because they're kind of doing it in time to music.
Well, songs are often used for concision, aren't they? Actually, it takes you from point A to point B in a much shorter way than you would if you were doing it in dialogue or having to show it. It also means you don't always have to show it. Whereas, as you quite rightly say here, you're actually getting it in real time to music. Also, by the way, let's talk about Sullivan being good here. There's also the song where the two wise men realise that they're starting to lose control, and it's "with fury beat deep we burn" is the lyric. But Sullivan's got this lovely kind of a burning music.
Yes, absolutely.
It sounds more like incidental music from a 20th century film, illustrating the anger of the two characters. It sounds incredibly modern to me. What it doesn't sound is incredibly old.
Yes.
So once again, you've got them both. I think when they are working, they work really well.
Yeah.
But in some senses, the obvious showcase song is about a third of the way into Act 2, which is the first cabinet meeting under the new Utopia as a limited company. So you've got the King as the chief executive, as you say, or chairman of the board, and you've got your Flowers of Progress, who are making up the other cabinet members, if you like. And in the original, the King is saying, "Are you sure this is how it would have, this is how it would occur in the Court of St James, i.e. the British Royal Court?"
Yes.
And they say, "Well, it's very much how it would occur if it was occurring in the Court of St James's Hall, which was a famous music hall in Piccadilly Circus, particularly famous for, it has to be said, minstrel shows."
Yes. But I think it was its main.
And so in the original production, I understand, Gilbert directed it, and indeed it was written as a mock version. I don't think they blacked up, but they certainly used...
They had the various Flowers of Progress, the six British representatives, still in their relative, the respective finery. So the barrister wearing gown, robes, wig, and so on. Had banjo and fiddle and bones, and I think a tambourine.
Yes.
Probably a couple of other things.
What one perceives to have been a Christie minstrel band.
Yes.
In fact, it was the Christie Minstrels.
It was the Christie Minstrels, and they arranged their seats in a semicircle, which is exactly how a minstrel show would be performed.
So anyone who'd been to see a minstrel show in a musical would understand what the joke was here. Of course, that won't play well now.
No.
Even though they were never blacked up in the original.
No.
But I think you found a tremendously clever... or you homaged a tremendously clever way of dealing with that, which got a huge laugh on the night I went.
Yes, which just goes to show that audiences can be easily pleased. Going back to the original, it was felt to be sort of very clever that Gilbert was kind of equating a meeting of a colonial government with a Christie Minstrel thing, which
is of its time.
Is of its time, yes, quite. So in a way, you have to divorce that. There can't be any context for this song, but nevertheless, it is clearly meant to be that the King is being sort of duped into performing an undignified song, or that he's not expecting or isn't aware of.
They are having some fun at his expense.
Yeah, so I was trying to think of alternatives, and I should point out that I was aware of a production by Southampton Opera, I should give credit where it's due, where they did a Morris dance instead of the minstrel
song, but in the style of a Morris dance. Yeah. And it should just be said, by the way, although it was in the original pretended to be Christie Minstrels, the lyrics were exactly the same as Gilbert's normal lyrics. He had not adopted the idiomatic wording that you get in a Christie Minstrel show.
No,
so you can turn that song into anything you want.
Yes. I was a bit sort of. I thought I checked with our MD about whether she felt it was sufficiently, like a Morris, whether the music was sufficiently similar to a Morris dance that we could get away with it. It's a bit faster than your average Morris dance, but
thank God for that.
Exactly. It has a sort of similar kind of feel to it in a way,
and it uses rhythms and sticks.
Yes, exactly. So. The question then was, why are they doing this? And so I'm afraid I concocted a rather feeble pun.
It was a fantastic pun.
To replace the reference to St James's and St James's Hall,
which is the one I was talking about earlier. Would you care to treat us?
I believe the King said, "Now, Mr Goldberry, I wish to check that this annual report we're presenting reflects our corporate social responsibility. I told you that we must demonstrate a moral stance," to which Mr Goldberry says, "Oh, I'm sorry, Your Majesty, I thought you said you wanted us to perform a Morris dance, or demonstrate a Morris dance." And so they do. And I think that did get a big laugh, because it got a sort of laugh of initial ho ho ho, sort of perhaps not a big laugh at the sort of at the poor pun, followed by a sort of bigger laugh when it was realised actually they were about to do a Morris dance, and they had been sort of taking their robes off or their uniform off to reveal sort of
the rosettes,
the rosettes,
yes.
And
all the things that make folk Morris dancing so entertaining.
Yes, and one of our cast members, one of the Flowers of Progress, actually went to the trouble of saying, "Oh, I'll do lots of ribbons and I'll put bells on them so that when we shake our legs, it's you actually hear the bells." And I said, actually, I'd rather not. I had a hunch that it might work. And you shouldn't have to do it. There, at the beginning of every verse, there is a tambourine, which, of course, because that would have been part of the minstrel setup. Of course, the tambourine sounds rather like the bells, exactly, that you would have on the end of a Morris dancer's leg. So the fact that they weren't wearing ribbons with bells on, but they just shook their leg at the beginning of each, in the introduction to each verse, and then stamped their foot, and fortunately the orchestra provided the tinkling and stopped at exactly the right moment. The fact that you shake a bare leg on stage, but you get the sound of bells going. Went down very well the audience, and you could do it at the beginning of every verse, and they laughed at the beginning of every verse, which is fantastically gratifying. I think there you are. You get a good visual gag, and you can't get enough of it. Exactly, yes.
But in a strange way, although you had changed the intent of at least the staging from Gilbert's original, I think you have absolutely done it in the spirit of the original, which is that actually this is a showcase comedy scene, and you've got all the laughs from it. I have to say, it's marvellous. I also particularly like those lyrics. I think, once again, this is how Gilbert and Sullivan work again.
In a way, this is the point of the second act. The second act should be all about what has happened. Act 1, as you say, sets it all up, and at the end of Act 1, in a long finale,
it is a long finale.
All 6 of the Flowers of Progress turn up, and then they are urged to reform the country. In particular, after they've said, "Oh yes, well we could do this, we could do that, we could do the other," the company promoter, Mr. Goldberry, unveils his plan for privatising the country, and all ends happily as far as everyone's concerned, apart from the wise men and Tarawa, who are saying, "What's going on? I don't like the sound of this." Plans, exactly, yes. So Act 2 should be all about what has happened, and in the end what it's about is songs of a tenor who can't do himself justice, and
all the love plots,
some romantic interludes, etc., etc. The big drawing room scene, whether it's done for laughs or for spectacle, doesn't really have anything to do with the Anglicisation, apart from the fact that they're wearing Western dresses rather than Polynesian dresses now. And this is the song, the half-yearly annual report of Utopia Limited, which in which all the satire sort of comes out, and basically says how Utopia has been reformed. And of course, the joke is that all these reforms they've introduced are actually things that haven't been done in Britain, and if only they were, then maybe Britain would be a better place.
In fact, the Flowers of Progress do say that they offer them back to the motherland.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
There's some lovely bits and pieces as well, because it's one of Gilbert's particular hobby horses, of course, is which Sir Arthur Sullivan had been made a knight, and he was still Mr. Gilbert at this stage, and indeed wouldn't be made a knight until the next king, and after Sullivan's death. So, and it's true, apart from Alfred Lord Tennyson, the arts were not hugely represented, except perhaps music, in terms of national honours. And there's this lovely chorus about having a Duke of Dickens, and also some painters like Millais and Lord Fildes, I believe.
Yes. I think
not remembered now, but he did actually. Apparently, did you know this? In the Edwardian era, he was actually made a knight, and he met Gilbert at some kind of event, and Gilbert took the credit for it. For saying, "Oh yes, I wrote in my song for Utopia Limited, you were going to become a member of the House of Lords," which obviously a knight isn't, but it was still a
quite.
And then I believe Fildes said back something like lines of, "Well, I hope the same thing happens to you," and then he got a knight.
I think there was some
backslapping.
Exactly. Yes. I think Fildes did claim credit for something else, but I forget what it was now.
But how resonant is that? Because who do we have in our House of Lords today? We have Lord Lloyd Webber. We have Lord Fellows.
Bragg,
right?
Yes.
Yes. Our cultural paragons are.
Well, in effect, yes. So Britain listened.
And a mere 120 years later,
yes.
the writer of Downton Abbey got it.
Oh yes, hurrah. That's progress.
Eventually. Well, and its flowers. But, I thought that was a great song, beautifully written, beautifully composed, beautifully done, and I thought your actors also did it a great deal of justice there as well. I mean, you got the laughs on that.
Yes.
And we shouldn't underestimate it. There's a lot to laugh about in Utopia Limited.
Yes,
It's funny. It just never quite hits the heights, which I think is where we came in, really.
It's good fun. It's all good fun, but just don't expect a plot.
Yes.
In effect, and don't expect. I think the thing is, in particular, don't expect a solution by Gilbert to how best to govern a country. All he does is say, "Well, this is a rubbish way, and this is appalling, and as for that, it's dreadful."
Yes. So, thank you very much.
Yes,
You've been an audience. Mr. Gilbert has left the building.
Yes.
And it is. I mean, it's fair to mention that it isn't a topsy-turvy plot.
No. Good point.
Which, of course, everyone thinks Gilbert, topsy-turvy, take something, turn it upside down. Not really that.
No, he makes a mistake of tell not show.
Yeah.
You never really see any, because Act 2 takes place entirely in
the drawing room.
In the drawing room in the palace where the drawing room is. But
you should see my drawing room. It's a picture.
Yes. Everything sort of takes, all these reforms are just described, and some of them are getting towards a topsy-turvy because they are it's sort of taking things beyond their logical conclusion almost. The idea of the county councillor building an 8-foot wall across the front across the front of the stage
for safety purposes
to protect the audience in case of fire, for example, and just the idea of individuals becoming companies. Yeah. Although, as you pointed out at the beginning, Jimmy Carr seems to have done a good job of
proving how
that might work. Yes,
and he's not alone. Yes,
indeed.
Yes, other comics are available.
Yes.
Sorry. Yes. So to boil it down, then, I mean, we like Utopia Limited, but it is a little limited.
Yes, I think so. It just so much of it is even the Act 2 finale is not your commonplace Act 2 finale at all. It's the only one, incidentally, in GNS that isn't just a retread, often with different lyrics, but usually
it's not a reprise in any way.
No, some or all of the music is almost always taken from earlier in the show. Utopia has a completely different finale. I think they did toy with having one that, but that was only because Sullivan had complained that he couldn't work out how to set Gilbert's original one. So the idea of making it a reprise of an earlier bit was purely force of circumstance. And in the end, it wasn't felt to be a satisfying finale. So Sullivan knuckled down and set Gilbert's on. And I did actually revive a third verse, which was cut. Another of the rare examples of lost material or cut material still existing.
I thought it was famously the finale where Gilbert said Sullivan gave up trying to write a setting Gilbert's score. So he, in fact, on this one occasion, wrote the music first and the lyrics came second. Or is that now identified as a myth?
I think it's not a myth, but I think they rejected that too. They went through a lot of trouble. Yes, so I think ultimately there were 3 different finales. There was the one that Sullivan said, "I can't set this." So then, I can't remember exactly which order, but I think Gilbert may then have said, "Right, write your tune, and then I will
put my lyric
in." And what he basically did was a hacked about version of his original lyric, but a lot weaker, basically, because it I think for one thing it had to fit fewer syllables, so it was quite compromised, shall we say. And then that didn't work, so they did the reprise of the Knightsbridge Nursemaids number, which is the big pomp bit from Act 1, and then I think that was felt just to be too inconsequential and not really an ending, and also, I mean, it lacked all satirical point, and so they went back to Gilbert's original. And Gilbert's original is so The penultimate number is the uprising, at the end of which we have some dialogue in which the wise men voice their unhappiness, and then nobody can work out what's to be done until Princess Zara, the heroine, perhaps with a bit of help from the legal representative, Sir Bailey Barr. We didn't say it was all good, but he's never referred to by name, of course. It's only a weak pun in the programme. It says anyway, they come up with the solution, of course, is government by adopting the party political system, and that leads to much rejoicing, and then we're into the finale. So sort of, there's been no musical accompaniment to sort of say how marvellous the party political system is. So what you actually have in the Act 2 finale is a sort of description of how marvellous Britain is, because its people, also prosperous, have grown. The poorest, if they wished it, might acquire land. Great Britain is the name by which it's known, to which some add, but others do not, Ireland.
Yes.
But even in that, there's some great... the chorus join in and sing things like, such indeed is the tale that is heard on the gale of the land, island that dwells by the sea. Let us hope for our sake that she makes no mistake, and she's all she professes to be. Each of the refrains to the verses is in that vein. So there is that, right at the end, Gilbert sort of saying, yes, it's marvellous, but actually it might not be.
But that stops it. I mean, if he hadn't done that, it would just be ridiculously and dreadfully jingoistic.
Yes. So, but again, I think that's in a way the only way he could finish, by with a sort of flag waving thing, but saying not really.
But you've missed, if I may say, the final denouement line which the King has.
Oh yes.
If there's one thing better than a monarchy limited, is a limited monarchy. And that is actually a perfectly sound answer.
Yes,
I think, yes.
Right.
I rather like that as a process.
Okay, jolly good.
Well, thank you, Jerry, for talking about Utopia. Let's just briefly talk about the next show, which the Centenary Company is doing.
Well, we are just building up to a performance of Trial by Jury, along with a review called Gilbert and Sullivan Tie the Knot, which is Lessons in Love and Matrimony from GNS, covering all 13 of the operas apart from Trial by Jury, so that includes Thespis, the lost show. And we're performing that on the 22nd of June, multiple performances.
So different times of day, you can
different
see
times
it,
of day, indeed, yes. And that is at St Alfred's Church Hall in Greenwich, and details, I'm sure, will be available
from the Centenary Company website.
This is, in effect, an additional show we're doing this year, because we've moved our main show to March rather than November, and it's actually worked out very well, because Trial by Jury being short and perfectly formed, one might say, it is almost perfection in terms of being laughs from beginning to end, completely music, no dialogue. It was their first collaboration for D'Oyly Carte. Thespis came previously, which was a very peculiar sort of almost pantomime type show. So it kind of sets out their stall for how they were going to do their shows and revolutionise musical theatre
to this day.
But it's in a nutshell. It's a beautiful piece, fantastic, and I think the review we're doing along with it, as I said, Lessons in Love, is a nice compliment. Given that Trial by Jury is all about what happens when love goes sour and the chap jilts the woman.
Well, he's always in liquor, isn't he?
Yeah,
he's
indeed.
a ruffian, a bully, a sot. Yes. Jerry, thank you very much. As always, a deeply insightful discussion about Gilbert and Sullivan. I hope to have many, many more with you. So good luck with Trial by Jury.
Thank you
I
very
hope
much.
to speak to you again.
Thank you.
Musical talk. And that was the splendid Jerry Pennell there, talking about Utopia Limited. Now, as he said, you can actually see the Centenary Company's latest productions, because there are two. It's Gilbert and Sullivan Tie the Knot and Trial by Jury, which is on this Saturday, as we broadcast this, 22nd June 2013. It's at St Alfred's Church Hall, which is in Roan Street, Roan, in Greenwich. SE10 9BJ if you're using one of these newfangled contraptions with GPS in it. And here are details of the performances. As I say, it's on this Saturday, 22nd of June, at 5:15. You can go and see it. You can see it again at 7:45, or if you just want to see Trial by Jury and not the review Tie the Knot, you can do that at 3:30. That's the start time for each performance. Doors open 15 minutes beforehand in each case. Prices are remarkably cheap at £10 a pop. Children £8. And for Trial by Jury in the afternoon at 3:30 only costs £5. Remarkable. The contact details for tickets 020 8294 2939 or email centenarycompany@gmail.com. And you can even buy tickets on the door if you don't want to do it in advance. Go along to the website for the Centenary Company, which is www.centenarycompany.co.uk. An interesting website with lots of lovely pictures from Utopia Limited. Well, that's it for this week. Isn't it always? At the end of this episode, I can think of nothing else to say except goodbye, and I don't see why I should buck that trend today. So, goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk presented by Thos and Jerry and edited by Thos. Copyright Musical Talk 2013. And why not go along to our website and listen to previous episodes at www.musicaltalk.co.uk. And we're also on Facebook and Twitter.